April 1945. Western Europe was collapsing under Allied pressure. German units were retreating, surrendering, or simply disappearing into forests and ruined villages. White flags were appearing everywhere, but not here. A small German strongpoint sat on the edge of a shattered town. Half-destroyed stone buildings, burned carts, broken church walls. The position was insignificant on any map, yet it blocked a Canadian advance route. A Canadian infantry company approached cautiously. These soldiers were veterans. Normandy, the Scheldt, months of brutal fighting behind them. They were tired, alert, and very aware that the war was nearly over. Their commanding officer ordered a ceasefire signal. A messenger stepped forward. Under a white cloth tied to his rifle, the Canadian NCO shouted the offer clearly. "You are surrounded. Lay down your weapons. The war is finished." For a moment, there was silence. Then a German officer stepped into view. He was a major, clean uniform, iron cross still pinned, pistol at his side. He stood upright, calm, almost defiant. Through a translator, his answer came back short and cold. "I do not surrender. My orders stand." The Canadians exchanged glances. This wasn't bravery anymore. It wasn't strategy. It was refusal, pure and absolute. The Canadian officer tried again. He warned him. He reminded him the war was lost. He offered his men safety. The German major didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult them. He simply shook his head. Behind him, his soldiers stayed hidden, weapons ready, waiting for the order to fight. Even now, even this late. The Canadian officer turned away slowly. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He made a single hand gesture, the kind that meant a decision had been made. And once Canadians made a decision in battle, they did not reverse it. The Canadian officer walked back toward his men without another word. There would be no more negotiations. The German major had been warned. He had been given a clear chance to surrender. Under the laws of war, the responsibility now rested entirely on him. The Canadians moved with calm precision. This was not anger. This was not revenge. It was procedure. The officer gathered his platoon leaders and spoke quietly. No shouting, no dramatic speeches, just short, controlled instructions. The kind given by men who had learned what hesitation costs. The German position was small but dangerous. Machine gun nests were hidden among broken stone and shallow trenches. If the Canadians advanced blindly, men would die. Even now, even with the war nearly over. So they chose a different path. Canadian artillery units were already positioned nearby. They had orders to support the advance. And now, those orders were activated. One final warning was sent forward. No response. The major did not step out again. No white flag appeared. Minutes later, the first shells landed. Not wildly, not indiscriminately. Each strike was measured, deliberate, aimed at neutralizing resistance, not destroying the village. Canadian gunners were known for discipline, and this was no exception. The German soldiers inside the position realized the truth faster than their commander. This was no bluff. Under mounting pressure, some began to panic. Others shouted at their major, urging him to surrender, but his orders did not change. And then, something shifted. As the bombardment tightened and Canadian infantry prepared to advance, movement appeared near the German lines. Hands rose. White cloth appeared where none had been before. The major was no longer in front. When the firing stopped, the Canadians advanced carefully. What they found was telling. Weapons dropped, soldiers shaken, exhausted, alive. The position was taken, but the major who refused to surrender was gone, removed by his own men before more lives were wasted. The Canadian decision had been brutal in its clarity, but it ended the fight and saved far more lives than it cost. When the firing stopped, the silence felt heavier than the bombardment itself. Canadian infantry moved forward slowly, rifles raised, boots sinking into mud. Every step was cautious. Late war German positions were unpredictable. Desperate men sometimes fought even after defeat was certain. But this time, no shots came. They found German soldiers emerging one by one from trenches and broken cellars, helmets dropped to the ground, rifles laid down carefully, almost respectfully. Faces were pale, exhausted, older than they should have been. These men had not wanted to die here. Canadian soldiers followed procedure exactly as trained. Prisoners were searched, disarmed, and separated. Wounded Germans received immediate medical attention. The same bandages, the same care Canadians gave their own. There was no celebration, no shouting, just quiet efficiency. As more prisoners were gathered, a clear picture emerged. The German major who had refused surrender was not among them. At first, no one spoke about it. But eventually, the truth surfaced in fragments, whispered explanations, nervous glances, unfinished sentences. When the bombardment began and it became clear the Canadians would not back down, the German soldiers confronted their commander. They pleaded with him. They argued. Some begged. He refused them all. In the end, the major was disarmed by his own men and removed from command. What happened afterward was never officially recorded. There were no reports, no witnesses willing to speak. Only the result remained. The position surrendered. Lives were spared. The Canadian officer listened without comment. He did not ask questions. He did not push for details. War had taught him that not every truth needed to be written down. As the prisoners were marched away, a young Canadian soldier finally broke the silence. If we hadn't acted, how many would have died? No one answered immediately. Then the officer spoke, quietly, firmly. Too many. The Canadians moved on, advancing deeper into Germany. Behind them, the battlefield was already fading into history. Another small place where a single decision ended a fight before it became a massacre. Years later, veterans would still remember that moment, not as a victory, but as a lesson. There was no medal for what happened that day, no headline, no official citation. Just a decision. For the Canadian soldiers involved, it became one of those memories that stayed quiet but heavy, the kind that returned late at night, long after the war was over. The German major had believed in orders more than reality, more than the lives of his men, more than the truth standing right in front of him. The Canadians believed in something else. They believed that refusing to surrender was not courage when the outcome was already decided. It was responsibility. And responsibility demanded action. Canadian doctrine was clear. Once surrender was offered and refused, the enemy position became a lawful military target. Delay only meant more deaths, on both sides. That clarity is what made the decision feel brutal, but also final. After the war, some German prisoners would quietly admit that the Canadian response saved them. Had the fighting dragged on, had the Canadians hesitated or rushed in blindly, the position would have turned into a bloodbath. Instead, it ended quickly, cleanly, decisively. The Canadian officer never spoke publicly about it. When asked years later about difficult moments in the war, he simply said, "The hardest choices weren't about fighting. They were about knowing when talking was over." History rarely remembers moments like this. There are no statues for discipline, no monuments for restraint, no applause for decisions made to stop things from getting worse. But sometimes, the most powerful actions in war are the ones that end it, even when they come at a heavy moral cost. That German major is remembered only for one thing: he refused to surrender. The Canadians are remembered for something else entirely. They made sure the war ended there, and not one step later.